Hello everyone, this is Andrew from Crown Academy of English. Today's lesson is about question tags, and we're going to look at the basic rules of question tags. So let's start. So, question tags are short questions at the end of a sentence. Okay, so that's very important. They come at the end of a sentence. And we use question tags in spoken English and also in informal written English, but mostly in spoken English. So let's look at 3 examples of question tags. She's pretty, isn't she? So this is the question tag in red, and you can see that it comes at the end of a sentence. So here is the sentence or the statement. Then we have a comma when we write it, and then we have the question tag. And if we write it, we must of course write the question mark. And here is another example. For equality, we can say, he's handsome, isn't he? So again, we have a sentence, and then we have the question tag at the end. And here we have example 3. You're going to Paris tomorrow, aren't you? You're going to Paris tomorrow, aren't you? So we have the sentence, and then we have the question tag at the end. Notice that the question tags are all different. Okay, so the question tag depends on the form of the sentence. So the form of this sentence gives us this question tag. The form here gives us this one, and the form here gives us this question tag. And I will explain these rules in detail in this lesson. Okay, so keep watching. Now, the meaning and use of question tags. So meaning number 1, there are 2 main meanings. Okay, so meaning number 1, to check if something is true. So an example. Here we have a meeting, a business meeting. And someone asks, or someone says, the meeting is at 10 o'clock, isn't it? Isn't it? The meeting is at 10 o'clock, isn't it? So we have the statement, the sentence, followed by the question tag. And the meaning of this is the person is checking if this is true. The person wants to know if the meeting starts at 10 o'clock. Okay, so the person is not sure. They are checking the time of the meeting. So they do this with a statement, with a sentence, and then a question tag at the end. So this is another way of asking a question. We could say here, does the meeting start at 10 o'clock? That would be the same question. But we often use a question tag in spoken English. We make a statement, and then we use the question tag to check this statement. Is this statement true? And we can also use a question tag simply to ask for agreement. So we're not really asking a question when we do this. We're simply making a statement, and we are looking for agreement. We think that people will agree with us. So here is an example. It's a beautiful car, isn't it? It's a beautiful car, isn't it? So we're saying, yes, it's a beautiful car. And then we're saying, do you agree? Okay, so for us, it's obvious that this is a beautiful car. And we say this asking if other people agree. Okay. So here, this is a real, I would say number one, this is a real question. We really want to know, does the meeting start at 10 o'clock? And here it's not really a question. We're simply making a statement. Okay. So when to use question tags? Well, this is very important. The basic rule is, for an affirmative sentence, we use a negative question tag. So it's the opposite. So if the sentence, the first part, if it is affirmative, then the question tag will be negative. Okay? So here's an example. The house is big, isn't it? The house is big, isn't it? So here is the sentence. And notice this is affirmative. This is a positive sentence. The house is big. But when we use the question tag is in the negative. Isn't it? Isn't it? Okay, so we have put the verb here, isn't. This is in the negative. Another example, they want to watch TV, don't they? So they want to watch TV. This is affirmative. And don't they? This is the negative. And don't worry, I'm going to explain the form of this and this in this lesson. And the opposite is true. So for a negative sentence, we then use an affirmative question tag. So if the first part of the sentence is negative, then the end, the question tag is affirmative. The house isn't big, is it? The house isn't big, is it? So negative, affirmative. They don't want to watch TV, do they? So this is negative. This is the negative statement. They don't want to watch TV, do they? And here is the affirmative question tag. Do they? Okay? So it's always, this part is always a sentence. Okay? This is a sentence or a statement. And then we use the question tag. When not to use question tags. So we do not use question tags at the end of a question. Okay? Remember, I showed you that we use a question tag at the end of a sentence or a statement, but not at the end of a question. So here is an example of a mistake. Is the museum open today, isn't it? No, this is nonsense. Okay, this is not correct, because this in green, this is a question. Is the museum open today? No. Weren't they doing their homework, were they? No, we can't say were they at the end, because this is a question. Okay, so that's wrong. Now let's look at the form. There are 4 rules for the form of question tags. So here we're going to look at auxiliary verbs. If the sentence, so the first part, if the first part of the sentence has an auxiliary verb, then we repeat it in the question tag. So we repeat the auxiliary verb in the question tag. So first, let's look at affirmative sentences with a negative question tag. Mark can play football, can't he? Mark can play football, can't he? So Mark can play football. So this is the auxiliary verb. It's in fact a modal verb. It's an auxiliary verb in the affirmative. And so we repeat the same auxiliary verb in the question tag. And of course we transform it into the negative. Mark can play football, can't he? I should call her, shouldn't I? I should call her, shouldn't I? So should is the auxiliary verb, so we repeat it in the question tag. And if it's affirmative here, then we put it in the negative here. Now let's look at negative to affirmative. You haven't fed the dog, have you? You haven't fed the dog, have you? So this is the present perfect. And haven't is the negative, is the auxiliary verb have in the negative. So in the question tag, we repeat it and we make it in the affirmative. We put it in the affirmative, have. They weren't listening, were they? They weren't listening, were they? So this is the verb be as an auxiliary verb, and it's the past tense of the verb be as an auxiliary verb in the negative. And so we repeat it in the affirmative. They weren't listening, were they? So the form of question tags is, well, we repeat, we have the verb first, and then we have the subject afterwards, because it's a question tag. So we have the verb first and then the subject. Verb, subject. Auxiliary verb, subject. Auxiliary verb, subject. Okay, and we take the subject from here. Okay, he, Mark becomes he. I. Okay. Rule 2. Let's look at the verb be as a main verb. As a main verb. Not an auxiliary verb, as a main verb. And again, if the sentence has be as a main verb, then we repeat it in the question tag. Mark is tall, isn't he? Mark is tall, isn't he? So we have the verb be as a main verb, and so we repeat it in the question tag, and we put it in the negative. The film was good, wasn't it? Okay. And let's look at the negative to the affirmative. You aren't well, are you? You aren't well, are you? So we have the verb be in the negative, you aren't, and then we have it in the affirmative in the question tag. Are you? And again we have the verb followed by the subject, because it's a question. Claire wasn't at her desk, was she? So here we have the third person singular of the verb be as a main verb. This is the past tense. And we repeat it in the question tag in the affirmative. Was she? And rule 3. Let's look at no auxiliary verb, and the verb is in the present simple. So, if the sentence has no auxiliary verb and it is in the present simple, then the question tag uses do. You like chocolate, don't you? You like chocolate, don't you? So we have a verb like, which does not have an auxiliary verb. So this is a main verb, and it is in the present simple. So like, we replace it with do, and of course we put it in the negative, so it becomes don't. So you like chocolate, don't you? Mark works in London, doesn't he? Okay, so this is probably the most complicated, the most difficult to understand or to remember. So if you had a verb with no auxiliary verb and it's in the present simple, then we replace this with the verb do in the correct form. And the third person singular of the verb do is does. And we put it in a negative, doesn't, followed by the subject. Okay? So I advise you to really read, learn, and understand this. Now let's look at the negative. You don't love me, do you? You don't love me, do you? So here we have the present simple in the negative. You don't love me. And so the question tag has the verb do. Don't becomes do. Claire doesn't live here, does she? So we have the negative of the present simple of the verb live. So Claire doesn't live here, does she? Okay, so the question tag has the verb do in the third person singular. And in fact, this case, these two sentences, the negative to the affirmative of the present simple with no auxiliary verb, in fact, it also follows rule number 1. Okay, so here this is rule 3, and it's also rule 1, because strictly speaking, this is in fact an auxiliary verb, isn't it? You don't love me, do you? So it follows 2 rules. It's probably easier to think of this rule. We have an auxiliary verb here, you don't love me, and so we repeat it in the question tag. You don't becomes do, doesn't becomes does. Okay, so that this is probably rule 1 is probably an easier way to remember this one. Okay, but it's the present simple, and it's the negative of the present simple. Okay, and finally rule 4, no auxiliary verb in the past simple. So if the sentence has no auxiliary verb and is in the past simple, then the question tag uses did. Jane went to the party, didn't she? Jane went to the party, didn't she? So here we have went, and this is the past simple of go, and there's no auxiliary verb. So in the question tag we use did, didn't she? And this is in the negative because this is in the affirmative. You worked yesterday, didn't you? You worked yesterday, didn't you? And now let's look at the negative. You didn't clean your boots, did you? So didn't clean, this is the past simple in the negative. So this is the negative of the past simple. You didn't clean your boots. And then the question tag uses did. Did you? In the affirmative. So negative, affirmative. Claire didn't see me, did she? So again, didn't see, this is the negative form of the past simple. Negative to the affirmative. Did she? Okay, and again, this actually also follows rule number 1 because didn't is also in fact an auxiliary verb. So if this is simpler for you to remember, then just use this rule. We repeat this auxiliary verb in the question tag and we change it from the negative to the affirmative. Didn't, did. Didn't, did. Okay, that's probably simpler to remember. Okay, so there we are. Hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested in some private online lessons then click here for the prices. And here are some other videos which I recommend.